This is People I Know Show, a podcast about interesting people, personal growth, and being wrong. I'm your host, Curt Karstensen. On this episode, it's a conversation with my friend Josh Torgeson. Josh and I hit on a number of topics in a mostly philosophical conversation. Some of these topics include procrastination, free will, death and suicide, immediate gratification, and a discussion of wrongness in the Being Wrong segment. We decided to have the conversation while driving around the Twin Cities, hence the title of this particular episode. I love your feedback as it helps me and potentially helps the show grow, so please take a moment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to leave a rating and a review. As always, visit People I Know Show on Facebook and Instagram. You can interact with the post there. It's also very helpful to growing the audience. If you like this or any episode especially, please share it with the people you know. You can share it on social media or just tell somebody about it. That would be very useful to me. Okay, it's time to get into my conversation with Josh Torgeson. The first installment, first of one or first of many, we'll find out someday. Josh Torgeson joins me with Driving with Josh, we're going to call it at this moment. I'm Curt Karstensen. Yes. Hello, Josh.
Hello. I love the name, by the way.
Well, one of the two of us came up with it, and by the way you're reacting to it, I think I recall it being you. So, Josh, I have a list of topics here, and I feel like on occasion it's healthy for me in general just to have a conversation about whatever random things I've been thinking about.
Uh-huh.
And you're a good person to assist me with this.
Okay.
I think I have some philosophical questions.
I like it.
And I don't know that I'm a philosopher or if I ever will be a philosopher, but I do like to think about the idea that maybe I am a philosopher.
Okay.
Does that make me a philosopher alone?
Sure. For this example, it does.
Okay, so we'll get into some perhaps philosophical questions or topics, and you helped me with this. Mm-hmm. You gave me a few ideas. So let's start with the thing that I feel like for much of my life has slowed me down. It is procrastination.
Yes.
You came up with that topic idea. What inspired you to send that to me earlier this week?
I saw an interesting TED Talk on YouTube, and it got my wheels rolling, and I have to imagine that most people wrestle with procrastination. I know that I do. I think it's a horrible demon that holds me back from a lot of my aspirations. And I heard a very interesting explanation of how it works, perhaps, and how you can get over it. So during this TED Talk, the person spoke of procrastination as a monkey in your brain that likes to have fun and likes to goof around and likes to be distracted. And along inside your brain is a deadline monster that creates fear whenever there's a deadline. So typically people that procrastinate get close to the deadline and complete the task, just prior to the deadline. And they typically do a good job. Statistically speaking, they do a very good job because they're focused for that short amount of time. When the problem arises, when there is no deadline, that's when things go awry typically. When procrastinators don't have a deadline, then it just keeps getting pushed farther away. I like that analogy. It's something I could relate to, and it really, just spoke to the fact that we need to set deadlines on most things that we do.
Did watching that TED Talk, and that one's by Tim Urban. I didn't know you were going to speak of this, but Tim Urban, one of the founders of the website Wait But Why, gave that TED Talk probably coming up on 2 years ago.
Yeah,
I was a big fan of that website. I don't know exactly what's happening with that website anymore, but there's all kinds of interesting pieces on there to read on a variety of topics. So if anyone's never been there, well, I will post that in the show notes here. So someone could find this TED Talk or more from Wait But Why, because I feel like that was one of the websites that really inspired some deep thought for me. So when I saw that video for the first time, or I saw the article that this Tim Urban wrote for the first time on procrastination, what it did is it made me feel normal. Like, okay, this is exactly what I feel. Other people do the same thing. So yes, even though I can look at my life transpiring and seeing all these ways that I could be more productive, at least I realize I'm not the only one. I'm not crazy, or maybe I'm crazy, but then I'm in a group of crazy people that do this exact same thing. That's exactly how I handle those situations. I put things off as long as I can, and finally, somehow, something happens to me, usually a deadline, to inspire the best possible work within a short amount of time, and I get there.
Yeah.
So I guess what I wonder is, how do some people not have this? What is different about the people that just get stuff done right away? Because I feel like I don't know them people. Where are they?
I don't know that they exist. I feel like as humans, procrastination is a means of saving energy until we absolutely need it. So prior to the abundance of food and energy that we have presently, it was probably quite necessary to put things off as long as possible, and then once they're necessary, you take care of them. And a lot of the things that we desired to do probably went away. It was a simpler time back then, so they didn't have quite as many tasks to take care of as we do now.
Do you feel like you enter every day with this long list of things to do that you're never getting done?
No, I make sure that I get it done on a nightly basis. I try not to go to bed with any open files that I need to take care of, because then I'll toss and turn in the night and wake up early, and it just won't be good. So anything that is pressing that needs to be taken care of, I take care of that day. Obviously, there are projects that get put off, especially being a homeowner. There's many things that could be taken care of sooner that get put off. But when it comes to most tasks, I try to take care of them before I go to bed.
Do you write down these tasks, or are they just lingering in the back of your mind and emerging from here and there?
Yes, I actually have a piece of paper that sits in my visor, because I also have a horrible memory. So I have a piece of paper that sits up in my visor that hangs down like a billboard, so I can look at it during the day and check off what I've done, and I can see what needs to be done. Because I'm constantly making phone calls and taking care of clients, so that's how I handle it. I have tried not writing it down, and it's a disaster. Things get missed, and I get yelled at, and nobody wants that.
So as you're finishing up that sentence, I realized my mind was starting to wander to what I would ask you next, as I could not control that thought. And I have several things I want to talk about.
Yes.
And I'm going to emphasize now, as we have this conversation, as anyone that might be listening, be aware of your thoughts. Like, I couldn't control the thought that was coming as Josh was finishing talking about his visor and the responsibilities that are written on the piece of paper that are up there. I was wondering, okay, what's the purpose of this conversation, and why would anyone want to listen to it? And that's, I think it's a philosophical question. Like, why would we have this conversation? What's the goal of it? And why would it be useful to anyone listening, just in general, to other people talking about whatever? And I think I have a good answer to that. But if I pose that question to you, what comes to your mind?
Well, I think it's just part of how we've evolved, and the language that we use in order to transfer information and communicate with others. We have to have conversation, and in the past recent years, we've been able to record that information, and people that we aren't directly in contact to can absorb that information as well. So I guess the reason we do it is hoping that someone else thinks like us, and we can help someone else know that they're not alone, maybe.
To help that they're not alone, I agree. And I think as much as anything is, let's just say, the old version of me that thought I was the only person that had these procrastination issues, kept living my life the way I was, that topic never came up in any conversation ever, maybe I could change something about it. Maybe something would happen to make me less of a procrastinator, but I really think it's absorbing the conversations of others or having that talk with somebody about the procrastination that is the only possible way to become less of a procrastinator if I felt like that was something that I was compelled to do to become less of a procrastinator. So I would say having the conversation is absolutely necessary to having conversations, and at the very least, if someone's not in a situation where they're having a lot of conversations about different types of topics, being able to hear other people have a conversation, whether it's eavesdropping from inside the cubicle at your office or at the checkout line at Target or something like that, or it's listening to a podcast, watching a TV show, whatever you're doing, that is how we possibly can inspire our thoughts to begin to change in whatever the topic, and hopefully use that to improve our lives. Perhaps we hear something that somehow in the short term or forever makes our lives worse in some way because we got some idea from somebody that we wouldn't have had, and now suddenly we're doing things that we maybe wish we hadn't done. But that is ultimately what happens. How are we ever supposed to know something we don't know until someone else brings it up or tells us about it or we read about it?
Yep, I agree. I think we have filters in place, though, so that we have the ability to block out things that are not advantageous. Just evolutionarily, we've had to use this filter constantly to block out conversation and drives to do things that were not advantageous. Otherwise, you die off. So the people that are able to use that filter live the longest.
The people that are able to do it most effectively, I suppose, yes.
Yes.
And procreate the most.
Yep.
And we're the descendants of those people over the course of an amount of years that's probably too much for our brains to comprehend. Okay, so along that same line, I had a thought before. It's already left me, but I will see if it comes back to me. I can't go get it. That's the thing I realized, Josh. I can't go get my thought.
Yeah.
But I think it can come back to me. So with the information that we hear, yes, we're not going to take everything we hear and immediately put it into our life and change the person who we are and do everything differently. But what does happen if we've never considered something before? No one's ever had that conversation with us. We never heard someone have a conversation about that topic.
Yep.
It does, I think, plant a little bit of a seed, like, oh, this is something that exists.
Sure.
So when that conversation starts to happen more, perhaps we start to have a few more thoughts about that topic. If we've never had a thought about it, and now suddenly we can think about it a little bit. I'm sure this happened to all of us. We've had some kind of a conversation where suddenly we can't stop thinking about the thing after because whatever the reason, this really strikes us in a way that it's just bouncing around our mind. And even if we didn't want to think about it, we can't stop it because until something happens, the thought is just the largest, most prominent thought that's coming into our minds.
Mm-hmm.
And so those types of things maybe we take an action on more quickly.
Yeah.
But even the things that we've never thought about before, and now it's in there. It's in the structure of our brain now holds some sort of memory that we've heard about this one thing before. Now the next time it comes up, maybe we start to adjust our ways in some way.
Yeah. I'm sure there's an unspoken scale of importance that we assess. And it's probably not always correct. I'm sure that we often dwell on things that are unnecessary, depending on your personality, But that's stuff that we can work on as we understand that we dwell on those things. And hearing Tim speak, his name was Tim, correct?
Tim Urban, yes.
Tim, yes. Brought to my attention, even though I knew those facts that when something doesn't have a deadline, it tends to get pushed off in perpetuity. Even though I knew that, for some reason when he said it, it rang true and it rang stronger for me. And I could make conscious adjustments there and set deadlines for some of the tasks that I want to have, that aren't a single day task.
So, yes, you finally found a way to use this information that strikes you in a way that you're able to do something slightly differently. So you do feel like you made an adjustment in your actions almost immediately after witnessing this?
Yeah, yep.
Which I think is the goal of any sort of information that we take in that we like. We'll begin to do something differently. Maybe it's just thinking differently. And that's really, as someone like me who pretends to be or perhaps is a philosopher in some ways, it's the thoughts becoming different, which ties into my next topic, a topic you and I have discussed before. And I'm curious to see where you're at on it at this moment in time.
Okay.
But as my podcasts begin to add up, a previous one with my friend Blessing, we opened the conversation just kind of by coincidence, because that was the first installment of Driving with Anybody where I had a conversation, and there may end up being more of these because it's kind of a peaceful way to have a conversation. Driving around the Twin Cities.
Yes.
But in that conversation with Blessing, I started recording just because I asked her, can we start recording? She said yes, and we were talking about free will at that moment. And this was going back just a few weeks. And at that point in time, free will was something kind of like I just spoke about a few minutes ago, where the fact that maybe we don't have free will, that was the side of that discussion I took, because that thought had been put into my mind. Up until about a year ago, and all years before that, anytime the thought of me not having free will had ever been presented to me, I totally disregarded it. And then, sometime in the last year or so, I realized that Sam Harris, author, philosopher, neuroscientist, truly thought that as humans that we didn't have free will. And he, as someone who is not religious, is one of the new atheists, as they used to be called, or maybe they still are called, one of the people that started writing books that started to get people thinking differently about believing in God and some of the religions. I thought it was kind of strange that, okay, this guy doesn't believe in God, but he also believes that he has no free will. It's just that didn't register with me. That didn't make any sense. But because I respect him and he's a very intelligent person, that I consider the fact that maybe he's right somehow, and I don't get it. And then in that conversation with Blessing, I defended that point because I do realize that maybe it's true, even though I didn't understand it. Well, in that time, I have taken a different understanding of the fact that maybe we don't have free will. And you and I have discussed it, but where are you at in this moment? Where do you stand on the idea that you, Josh Torgeson, do or don't have free will?
I quite enjoy listening to Sam Harris as well. He's very well spoken, a great thinker. And I listen to some of the information on YouTube, some of his speeches. And I understand the concept at this point. I don't make it 100% mine yet. I haven't had a revelation of any sort at this point. I still wrestle with the concept of not constantly having control of your being or thoughts. I do wish to take in more data on that topic, and I'd like to understand your thought processes on that. But at this point in time, I haven't made it my own yet.
And that's, I guess, the difference between you and I. I was not someone that's made it my own up until just less than a couple weeks ago at this point. And then I took in some more information, and it clicked with me, and was a very powerful experience where I took the belief and the understanding, I came to an understanding that I, Curt Carstensen, do not have free will. What I have is the illusion of free will. And for someone that's potentially listening to this conversation and has never considered this, I am totally prepared for anyone listening to just not understand it, not agree. Whatever thoughts are coming to your mind, if they are, I totally get that, because I feel like I've experienced that before too. But if I can try the best I can to explain what clicked with me, and if you remember just a few minutes ago in our conversation, I mentioned that pay attention to your thoughts, where they're coming from. And for the first time in my life, I came to the understanding that I am not thinking my own thoughts. They are coming to me. Every thought that I've ever had, it appears, came to me. I've never once went and got it. Like sometimes you certainly get the feeling of trying to remember something. Oh, even that just happened a few minutes ago also. I just thinking about something. Where was it? Yeah. But then the thought does come back. Maybe it seems like we go get it. Do you think you go get the thought, or do you think it just comes back to you again?
Well, it's just a part of our recall. There again, it's associated by importance or divided by importance. So perhaps that topic was not the most important or not top of mind, and your mind assessed that something else should be spoken of at that point in time.
And I did end up coming back to that thought. It came back. It took a little while, but it came back to me. But let's consider those moments in our lives that I think most or all of us have experienced, where we knew we were thinking about something, we couldn't think about it anymore, we couldn't remember what it was, and then time passes in a totally unrelated situation, we suddenly have the thought again. And then we connect the dots that, oh yeah, that was what I was thinking about that I forgot. You've experienced this?
Correct. Oh yeah. Yep.
Perhaps there's someone that hasn't, but I'd imagine that's a very human thing. If our brains are capable of thinking and of remembering, we're probably going to have this experience every once in a while. And that's a great example of, you were just at some point, maybe earlier that day, trying to think of this thing, and everything within your brain power to try to remember it, you couldn't do it. But then randomly later, totally not even trying, probably,
sure,
it comes back to you. You don't go get it. So when you're trying to get it, you can't get it because, well, we're not capable of getting our thoughts. Our thoughts come to us. And that's a good example of a thought that escaped us and then just comes back to us again based on whatever else was happening around us that somehow made that thought finally reemerge.
How does the power of influence play into this? So, just like when I watched the TED Talk, Tim stating that fact or multiple facts rung true with me and gave me a new look at some data that I had already known. You know, I understood that the things that he said were true prior to him saying them. But I feel like we do have the power of influence, and that's why we have people that we appreciate listening to or reading books or whatever it may be. How do you work the consumption of data through the different mediums into this equation?
I think this is a good example of the varying degrees of which we're ready to take in some information. So you and I are two people that, if we claim to be procrastinators, when that topic comes up and it's something that we feel we've struggled with, I think we're very prone to being able to listen and focus and be very ready to possibly use this new information to adjust the way that adjust our thinking is the way I would have used to say that, but really adjust our openness to the different thoughts. Our different thoughts might start coming to us, and then we would react to those thoughts and maybe possibly change our ways a little bit based on this topic that we're very ready to hear this new information on. But sure, opposing that is when I bring up free will or the illusion of free will, if someone hasn't considered this and the way that I'm explaining it doesn't connect, even you I think you get the concept, but it doesn't resonate with you the way that watching a video about procrastination does.
Correct.
It hits you a different way. You're not suggesting that the idea is false, but it's also not something you're prepared to or able to take on as a truth for yourself. But you can maybe watch procrastination videos and think, yeah, that's true. Exactly. That's what happens. I get it. I understand myself better. Let's go.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. So for a year or so, when I'd heard about the fact that at least one really smart person thinks there's no free will, and I initially thought that's ridiculous, but he's smart, so now I need to consider possibly him being right and me just not being smart enough to understand, as that's kind of the way that I would approach something new like that, where yes, who says it makes me think maybe I am wrong, which is a whole nother part of why I have this podcast, is the fact that at one point I realized I was wrong about a lot of things, or used to be wrong, And then I realized I need to really be open to considering things that I just never considered before. So I really put a focus into being open to ideas that used to not be true to me.
Good.
So, but with this, if someone's listening and free will isn't something they've thought about, I can't imagine anyone being persuaded by anything I'm saying right now, and I wouldn't expect them to be. But what I can do is be someone that feels that they're a philosopher in some ways and has taken in some new information, and then I can be maybe the first person to share this, have this topic, have this conversation. So if it strikes someone in a way that they're curious, they can begin and continue to take in the information, and maybe that's you. Maybe you're someone that will keep on watching more intelligent people's perspectives on free will or no free will, and someday come to a different understanding than you have right now.
Do I have a choice in the matter?
And you don't. That's the thing. So that's the part that we've skipped over so far. With the fact that I now agree that I have no free will, I'm not in control of seeking more information on it. It's the fact that now that it struck me as something I understand differently and understand better, I have this yearning to at least occasionally continue to consume information about it. And maybe in some moments I have the thought of watching more videos, or actually I'm listening to a book called Behave by, I believe, Robert. I'll have to think of the name here. I'll pull it up here in a second. But I'm listening to a book called Behave that's kind of on this topic, and I find it fascinating that scientifically there's a lot of things that go into our brain that I just haven't really given consideration to.
Sure.
And I'm beginning to understand slightly better. I'm still not anywhere near truly understanding it and being able to talk about it like I'm some scientist, because I'm not and maybe never will be. But knowing that people that have devoted their life to studying the brain can explain things about the way as we as humans act in certain situations and what causes us to be who we are does give more credence to the fact that, yes, I agree that this is the reality. I am not controlling any of these things. I used to think I was, but I'm not. Things are happening in my brain. I might feel the emotions attached to it. I certainly have the sensation of thought that is attached to me being alive, and I'm aware of my thoughts. I'm aware of the thoughts that are most prominent. I'm aware of the thoughts that engage me in some way, that give me a feeling, they give me a drive, but all of this is happening passively. I am just witnessing myself feel and think and do, and when I'm doing something scientifically, milliseconds or seconds before I do anything, my brain is already reacting to it. Before I even know that I'm about to do it, it's already about to happen. And even though I haven't done the research myself to prove this, but when intelligent people tell me this is what's going on, I, being who I am, I can't help but to give them the respect they deserve because they've spent their whole life doing this. Sure. And begin to understand that, I don't understand myself the way that I used to think I understood myself, and just try to learn more about it to see why exactly all these things that feel like I am in control of, I am not in control of any of them.
Okay. Can we still be friends if I don't believe you?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
All right, good.
This is the process my life is going to take, and to be a good friend of mine, I think is going to be someone that's going to want to have these types of conversations with me, and I don't expect people to agree with me on anything. They don't have to, but if they're the type of person that's willing to have the conversation and consider other ideas, that's the type of person I'm drawn to.
Good. Yes, I love free thought and open conversation.
So if I haven't persuaded you at this moment, I'd imagine anyone that might be listening to this is not persuaded either, and I don't expect them to be, but I'm happy.
It's going to be a difficult sell.
I don't know that I need to sell anyone on it, because whether it's true or not doesn't
affect you.
It doesn't affect me anymore. I see what I see, and I agree with what I agree with.
Yep.
And I think that it's made my life immediately better based on this, at least this one concept, Josh, is now I can look back to everything I've ever done before and possibly regret it. And there isn't a lot of those things, but even on a day-to-day basis, there's things I do that I wish I would have done better, and then I think that's the only way it was going to happen in that moment. everything that built up to that moment, me being who I've been for 35 years, and all of the surroundings that moment or in the last few days that have built to my temperament in that moment, how tired I am, all these different little factors contributed to me responding, acting in a certain way. So when normally I would regret some things about my day, like here's a perfect example today. Today, as we're recording this, the stock market took quite a bit of a dip, and I was considering making a move, and I dabble with this a little bit. I'm trying to get better, and the move I would have made with some money would have been actually fairly lucrative. It would have been very good for me, and I used to have these same ideas prior to a couple weeks ago, and I would just kick myself, and I'd feel bad about it, and I'd feel like, oh, why didn't I do that? Now it's like, oh, I totally understand why that happened. That was the way it was going to happen, and I feel so much better. It's like my temperament, my mood is way better on average because I don't worry about these things that I might have done slightly wrong or critically wrong in the past.
To me, it seems like a form of religion. To me, it feels like something that's trying to control you, or that gives you the perception of not having control. And that's what religion did for me. And I was confirmed, and understood shortly thereafter that the Bible wasn't the truth for me, and organized religion wasn't the truth for me. And I found peace in not needing that data to guide me. And I could make my own decisions. So I feel rather like that's another belief system that is trying to guide me, but I still don't have a firm grasp on it, perhaps.
And I think your assessment is correct. This seems to be, in a lot of ways, very similar to a religion. I suppose I'm not going to be praying, in a sense, to the illusion of free will God, and that type of thing.
Sure.
I guess what I'm in search of, and this is what I'm drawn to, and this is why I have the types of conversations I've had in the past with people, and I watch the certain YouTube videos, listen to the books and the podcasts. I listen to what I'm drawn to is a constant search for the truth.
Yep, correct.
And even though I know, even as strong as the evidence seems to be for me on this and how it makes me feel, I can't stand here and pronounce that this is the absolute truth. Maybe some scientists somewhere can, and I think some of them have, but that's the same way people might do with a given religion. They will pronounce that it is true, and then over here is someone else with a different religion pronouncing that that is true, and those two things in some area cannot both be true.
And really, if it gives you strength and peace, it doesn't matter if it's true for anybody besides you.
And it doesn't need to, but I think what it can do and will do for me is being aware perhaps of why I do the things I do, why I've done the things I've done, why I'm driven by the things I'm driven by, I can now have new thoughts emerge to me where I can repurpose my goals, the thoughts that are most prominent, the things that I write down and read again and again, which creates, I guess, more thoughts about those topics.
That's what I can't grasp, because you're speaking of changing your mindset. You're speaking of making changes.
Yes.
But that would take will. That would take a predetermined desire. So I know right now that I want to make a change, and I'll make that change in 30 seconds.
Are you the creator of the thought that made you feel you want to change? Or is it just the combination of a thought and a feeling that is emerging to you that makes you realize, yes, I want this?
Is it all external stimuli?
Well, internal too, I suppose. But yes, there's everything around us is what amounts to our thoughts and our feelings, and ultimately our actions and inactions.
Our experiences.
Our total life experience is a combination of all these things. Is what I'm going with, and I truly believe at this moment. And I, of course, give myself, with this and everything, the right to potentially change my mind. And my mind is going to change slightly in some way. I'm going to get to a different understanding of it. And maybe what I'm saying right now, what seems to be true, which is what I'm saying is matching the thoughts that are running through my mind so quickly into my mouth and out as words, that these thoughts will be different later, and I would, if we have the same conversation 5 days from now and I watch 2 videos and read 3 things between now and then, what I say to you at that time will inevitably be slightly different because of what I take in the meantime. And I can't control any of that. That's just the way it's going to happen.
Okay.
But I love this conversation.
Yeah.
I love that you're having it with me. And
I like it. Yeah.
I'm thrilled if there's anyone that's listening and thinks this is worth listening to and they want more of it, because this is what inspires me, and you maybe can hear it in my voice.
Yeah, you sound very enthusiastic. I like it. It's a great conversation, and I love driving at night around the metro. And talking with friends.
So this is Driving with Josh. Josh is doing the driving. I would be too distracted with this conversation to be a good driver right now, but I think he's doing fine. And that book I mentioned previously is called Behave, The Biology of Humans at Our Best and Worst by Robert M. Sapolsky. And I'm not very far into it, and it is very in-depth, and it feels like something I'm going to have to listen to again, and probably actually read it too, which it takes a little more time and effort because I can't do it while I'm driving around or walking from place to place, which is why I like audiobooks. But let's step back from the illusion of free will conversation. You are someone that takes in a lot of podcasts and audiobooks, and you are in your other vehicle, driving around a lot. What is it for you that has drawn you, that has compelled you to spend that time not only listening to music, because I know you also love listening to music, but also listening to podcasts and audiobooks?
I just feel like I could, I have so much idle time while driving. I put on 60,000 miles a year on my work vehicle. So that's a lot of windshield time, and I can be absorbing data and entertainment as well, of course. But I try to listen to things that will expand my mind and give me a new look on something I perhaps saw a different way prior, like the procrastination thing. Or I also just like audiobooks because they take you to a different place. I'm a big Ernest Hemingway fan.
So do you find yourself listening to more fiction or nonfiction, and why?
Majority nonfiction, but Hemingway is he's really the only nonfiction I go to. Or I'm sorry, the only fiction that I go to.
And why? What compels you? And I use the word compel because you have no control over this, of course, from my opinion.
Correct.
My perspective.
And I'm actually not sure.
So you're not sure, but when you are searching through possible books to listen to,
yes.
Are there Hemingway books you have not read or listened to at this point?
Yes, and some of his later stuff I don't enjoy as much as his early stuff.
He was a different person at that point. He couldn't control it.
Yep, and he wrote very much about his life at that point in time. So the time that he spent in, Italy is very different than the time he spent in Spain, is different than the time he spent in Cuba, And I can imagine that I will have different thoughts at many different points in my life as well.
And I guess this draws back to the previous topic slightly, but as we look at our lives, if we're able to remember our lives, we know that we thought differently on things at different points in our life when we were doing things differently.
Yep.
And just how that continues to evolve. And for whatever the reason, if someone argues a different perspective, and certainly you're allowed to do that, of why that happens, but it does clearly happen. So being aware that that has happened, that it's going to continue to happen, and then as it's happening, or as we look back on a previous day, week, month, or year, or decade, and kind of consider what's happened, we now there's maybe another way to look at it.
Sure, yeah. Hemingway is entertainment. I'm not positive why I enjoy his writing so much. Like I said, I think it takes me to a place where I have never been. And The Sun Also Rises is Italy and Spain, and watching the bullfights and such in Pamplona, which you've had contact with.
Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah.
I've been to Pamplona. The running of the bulls takes place there.
I read the book, though, so.
Yeah, and I guess being there, maybe I would enjoy the book more than before I was there.
Yeah, maybe.
There's a history to that thing that I can understand it, and as I guess since we're on the topic, I'll explain briefly what I tend to understand about it is they had bullfights back in the day and have for many years. The bulls arrived to town and arrived to Pamplona and were in a holding pen on one side of the town, and the stadium was on the other side of the town, and they needed to get the bulls from point A to point B, and they just let them loose running down the streets. And then people, usually young men,
crazy young men,
began to, for whatever excitement they got from it, run with the bulls. And then the local ordinances, if that's what they were called at that point in history, let's say it was the late 1800s, and I'm not sure about the date exactly, early 1900s perhaps, the ordinances said, no, you can't do it, it's illegal. However, these people were penalized, I'm not sure. But Hemingway was there, wrote about it, the books circulated. People then went to Pamplona because of his books and wanted to run with the bulls, and because it brought in these tourists that otherwise wouldn't have been there if not for his literature. Pamplona officials realized, this is good for our city to have these people come here.
It's a good source of revenue.
So we're going to let them run with the bulls. So a century or so later, it still happens, and it's exciting, and there's events built around it. I think it's like an 8 runnings over 9 days or something like that. The San Fermin Festival, if I recall correctly. And I took part in it a few years ago, my friend George and I, and that is episode 1 of People I Know show. If you didn't hear about that, we talk about it just briefly as we go through our adventures. And that was a great experience. The bullfights themselves were one of the most despicable things I've ever witnessed, because I assumed a bullfight would be an actual, an equal matchup. It was not. It was just bull torture, which I'm happy, I guess, that I witnessed it for the fact that I now know it exists and now can be emotionally attached to how much I don't like it, and perhaps be someone that influences other people's thinking, their new thoughts on this matter, because I had no idea what exactly happened. I hadn't done the research, and then I was there, and it was one of the least entertaining things ever. And I totally understand that people have different cultures, and maybe if you've grown up with this, you find value in it and excitement in it. But coming from a different culture, it is maybe as much as anything I've ever witnessed as an outsider in someone else's culture that I can just stand up and say, this is awful. How can you actually enjoy this? And perhaps there's a reason they can, but I know...
Well, I think animal cruelty is present in many different cultures, and I think it's unacceptable in all of them. But it takes a change of mindset for that culture.
And I suppose that's a rare case of animal cruelty where it's celebrated. There's a lot of it that goes on where we don't see it, and the food that a lot of us eat, you don't, and I guess we can talk about that a little bit, why you don't eat meat. But there's animal cruelty in certain ways just basically right in front of us, but we can't see it because it's not actually in front of us, but it's happening, and we are... If someone like me still eats meat, every animal I've ever eaten has been killed for me, but because of my culture, of course, and what I've grown up with, it's normal, and I haven't changed that behavior yet because I have a habit, and I guess I enjoy eating it, even though conceptually I know that it's not the best thing, but I'm not compelled to change that behavior yet. And someday perhaps I will be, and it won't be free will of my own. It will be something I'm just finally so fed up or disgusted by it, perhaps, that gets me to stop. Why did you stop eating meat?
I don't know. I finally realized that I heard someone say that once we establish that we no longer need meat to survive, we can survive without it, then it's just blood sport. Once you assess that you can survive off of vegetation and, legumes and such, you're literally killing for sport, which has changed over time. That hasn't always been the case. At different points in time, there wasn't vegetation available, and I understand that that's why it was necessary to kill, other animals to survive. You needed caloric intake in the winter, and there wasn't cabbage and lettuce and Brussels sprouts. So I don't dispute the necessity at one point in time, but in present day, we do have farms that are available all year round, and we have stores that are open 24 hours a day. So there's really no reason to kill other animals nothing has to die for me to live. And if it doesn't have to die for me to live, why would I do it? It's sport at that point.
That's a fair point, and I don't disagree with anything you say, but I'm not going to, based on you saying that, I'm still not capable.
That's it. I'm getting out.
Well, that wouldn't be safe because you were driving. I don't feel like I'm capable of doing that, but it's certainly another good example of why having conversation, listening to podcasts, reading books, whatever we do is relevant, because a few years ago, I had never considered that. Like, if I would have considered it, the fact that maybe I would ever stop eating meat, it was an absolute no. I'm going to eat meat because that's what I do and that's what I enjoy.
Yeah.
The thought has come to me many times since then that at some point I will probably stop eating meat for good. I just don't know when that's going to be, when I'm going to feel so compelled to do it, because with my, and I guess I keep going back to it because now I see everything through this filter, with my illusion of free will, the way we act is a combination of how compelled we are to do something with the opposing forces that are preventing us from doing it. None of this is a choice of our own. It's how strongly do I feel about stopping to eat meat, and what are all the opposing forces? Well, for one, my family, I grew up on a farm, and one of the things I can always have is my parents raise animals, and they butcher something every year or so. And so we have beef that I can have at no cost to me. It's kind of like a family gift from my parents, from my dad, that I never need to buy meat because I go home and I get some, and I still find it delicious, and it's my habit. And to go away from that, for instance, and every time I go to a restaurant and see things on the menu that I know I enjoy, I'm just not compelled to stop doing it. Conceptually, intellectually, I totally think I should. I don't know what's going to happen to make those emotions and thoughts turn in a way where my action represents the belief I hold, but the one that I do not act towards.
Do you believe that animals have feelings and that they feel pain?
Yes, because I believe that I am just an animal that can have a conversation like this, basically. Even though that animal nor I has free will, we're living our lives, and certainly if I can feel pain, I can assume that most or maybe all animals can also feel pain.
Have you ever seen a dog cry or a cow cry when their young was taken away?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen things on a farm that make me recognize that animals, without a doubt, feel pain.
So it really is no different than killing your neighbor for lunch, which I assume you're not going to do.
No. Well, the difference is I did not grow up eating that species.
Your neighbor?
And I have I'm not compelled in any way to ever do that. So it's, yes, I know what you're saying, totally, and I agree with you, but there's no habitual behavior involved, no cultural acceptance involved that is an opposing point of what I intellectually agree with.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't preach about it. I just live it.
And I also have no urgency. Like if it was told to me if I eat meat anymore, I will get sick and die from it, I can't imagine I would ever eat meat again.
Well, people are told that every day and they don't make the change.
Because it's not an urgent death for most people unless you know of some disease that I'm not familiar with. And I think some people do have. I think we were talking, there's an individual that has some sort of disease where she can barely eat almost anything.
Yeah.
So it's someone who has these dietary restrictions. I think it becomes pretty easy then to stop doing the things that will kill you. But it's still not for everybody. Some people probably would still really struggle with that because of the habit, the behavior, the addiction, whatever it is, even though they know what's best for them. And that's so many things that we're involved in that we know we can do better. Why are we not doing better with this thing that we know is not good for us?
Sure. Yeah, just because I don't eat meat doesn't mean I don't eat terribly. I still eat too many carbohydrates and sugars and other things that I know are harmful for me.
Just not harmful for some other living species.
Correct, yes.
So you're okay with potentially hurting yourself as long as you're not hurting the cow or the steer standing in a field right now somewhere in America.
As long as I get immediate gratification, I'm fine with it.
Which is a great example of our human qualities that cause us to react to certain things in certain ways and do things that we know we still shouldn't do, no matter what it is. And so that's why when I grab hold of the illusion of free will, it's another great example of all these things that I struggled with, and I know I can do better. Well, here's why: because my brain is really sending a signal. Even though I think I have these thoughts that are best for me, my brain, with the way it reacts to certain situations, is absolutely telling me something different, and it is telling me something that is stronger and more urgent than those other thoughts. And then I react, and I'm like, why did I do that? And I feel bad. Well, now I know what's happening. So now the thoughts that need to come to me and how compelled I am to go against whatever these urges are, that needs to be way stronger than it ever has before to get my behaviors to possibly be different.
Sure. And we also understand that we act differently based on the amount of stressors in our life or the amount of issues that we deal with on a daily basis. The more easy your life is, the finer the grains of sand are, the more you can deal with some of these peripheral items. I feel like if you're in the middle of a civil war and you find nutrients in an animal, you're not going to care whether that animal feels the pain or not. You're going to do whatever it takes to survive. So the easier it becomes for us to survive, the more we have the opportunity to take a look at some of these issues.
Well, if you're in the middle of a civil war, someone who otherwise would have no ambition to ever cause harm to another human might also need to kill to survive.
Correct.
So eating an animal at that moment seems totally inconsequential if that's what it takes to survive. So yes, as our ancestors lived on this planet wherever they lived and found ways to survive, whatever they had to do to survive is something I'm grateful for, because I exist because every one of my ancestors lived long enough to procreate. And if they didn't have the qualities that it took to do that, then I wouldn't be here, or you wouldn't be here. None of us, any of us as individuals, wouldn't be here if every single one of our ancestors didn't do what they needed and get help from others in their tribe or their family or their neighborhood to live long enough to have the baby that eventually had other babies, that other ones that had us.
We do have things that actually mess with that presently, like modern medicine. I question the validity of the use of modern medicine. I think it's injured the human genome, and I think it's going to change humans as we know them, because, I probably should have been dead quite young. I have asthma. I wouldn't be able to run from a wild animal or whatever was trying to kill me. I would have had an asthma attack of sorts, and they didn't have hospitals with wonderful medicine back then to get rid of my asthma. But that's perhaps a different conversation.
And we have as much time as you want for this conversation or the possibility of a future conversation with you. And let's see, do you want to get into that, or I think I have another topic that we can get to that kind of
your topics
that kind of transitions from that is just the topic of death. We've been tiptoeing around it with different pieces of the conversation, but not really about our individual mortalities.
Okay.
And I think you're someone that has an interesting perspective on this that I've heard before and is worth talking about again and sharing with others, is as you look at your life and eventually what is inevitable is that we all, unless some really big advancement in modern medicine, we're all going to die.
Yeah.
And when you look at your mortality, what types of things, what types of thoughts transpire from that, and how you're living your life and how you might live your life later on?
I guess the main point when it comes to death is I would like to have more control over it. I don't wish to be in a vegetative state for multiple years, having people take care of me, and there's no quality of life, and I'm a liability on a system. So when it comes to death, I really do wish to have as much control over it as possible. I know suicide is frowned upon, and it's a black word, and we avoid it at all cost. But I I do think that as humans, we should have more humane ways to find that end on our own. We shouldn't have to blow our heads off and have your family come home to a huge mess. So I do feel very strongly that we need to have a humane way to end it when we feel necessary. And, this brings up questions of psychological health and depression and such. I don't feel I have any of those. I just wish to have more control over the end, just like I do about the present. I feel like I want to have as much control as possible over the present. So I do feel that when the time is there, when I'm a liability instead of an asset, that I'll go find a grizzly bear to wrestle or whatever's necessary. Skydive without a parachute. There's things you can do.
Well, we can step back from the human aspect of that, because that certainly brings up thoughts that are not pleasant.
But is it pleasant to be in a vegetative state or in a state that you don't have any control over?
If you're no longer capable of a quality of life that you desire, and it's physically, medically impossible, then I suppose that could enter the conversation. And you're in the state of mind where it's stable, your mind's stable. Like, certainly you speak of depression, and people in those moments and those feelings react in a different way than they might if they're able to get some help or counseling. But
Sure.
You're talking about when you're much older than you are right now, when you're...
Or even not. Even if you have an incurable cancer or something.
Okay, yes.
When it's taken out of your hands, I feel it's unfortunate.
Well, you do with your dog or your cat or other pet when
Yes.
when you can clearly see that their quality of life is irreversible and they're in this terrible pain. People do that all the time with
Yes.
their most loved friends in some ways, and this certainly. I don't really deal much with the trigger term, but I know these types of conversations, I'm sure, are bringing up thoughts to somebody that aren't pleasant about what they've done in those moments with the animals or maybe the people in their lives where they've had some situation that relates to this. But we do that, and it's totally acceptable with animals, and I don't think I'm where you are at quite yet. I haven't, mostly because I haven't really put a lot of thought into it. I don't know. I think for my personal life, I just have the ambition and the intent of living for many, many, many more years where I don't need to consider this yet. But who knows? I might wake up tomorrow with some sort of ailment that is never going to get better that would make me think about this some more. But I guess get back to the thought of what we do with our most beloved pets, that's totally normal, totally acceptable.
Yep.
And why? Well, we're doing the most humane thing so that...
If you see somebody's, something is suffering, we put an end to it.
Yes. So that is one of the frontiers, I think, of human psychology that as societies and cultures we haven't collectively gotten to a point of that yet. But I'd imagine the way we're advancing, that's something that will happen. Like, it'll be more acceptable and at some point be totally legal to make that decision. And I think in some cases, isn't it, when you have
It is.
an absolutely incurable
Yes.
disease and you're in a normal state of mind but just are facing what is coming to you?
I believe Oregon allows it at this time.
So it's a topic that, whether or not we want to think about it, is probably... It's a conversation. It's a topic that if we consume media of any kind or talk to anybody other than ourselves, it's going to come up again. So for the purpose of this philosophical conversation, it is something that it is to be considered.
I actually personally believe that I've dealt with suicides in the past with friends and such, and I have to honor the thought that they thought that their life was painful enough that they should end it. I can't... We say that it's a selfish act, and of course it is, but it's quite selfish to think that they should stay present for merely to keep us out of pain.
They should continue to endure whatever pain they're enduring.
Sure.
Instead of it being transferred to us because we don't know how to handle that situation.
Correct. why can we not embrace that person was in a situation where they felt they had no other options? Maybe they did have options, but maybe they didn't. And life is finite anyway. I mean, I'm not saying that any of this should be done prematurely, but what I'm saying is I believe that if somebody feels strongly enough that they don't want to be present any longer, we should respect that instead of feeling horror and saying that it's selfish and condemning that person. We should respect that act, perhaps.
So what I think you and I can agree on is what that person thinks and feels should not be dismissed, and we shouldn't try to change everything about their experience and make them think what we think they should think.
Correct.
We should recognize that this person is having an experience that is not what we're having, and they should be, at least their thinking should be respected. And if we had a better way of communicating about this, perhaps some people, many people in that situation would be able to have, or would be better prepared to, because of the life that they lived and everyone around them, be able to have a different type of conversation about what they're feeling, maybe, which allows them to get the help that we think that they need and want them to have, that they don't feel like they can get because of maybe the lack of conversation, really healthy debate on this topic, maybe.
And I don't dispute that some of that is beneficial, of course, that getting counseling might pull them out of the state they're in. But I also think that we have to respect people's desires, whatever they may be, as long as they're not injurious to us physically.
And certainly that happens too, where someone has come to the conclusion that their life is about to end on their own, and then they take other people out with them.
Yes, that's not acceptable.
No, and that happens, well, probably quite frequently. Or because of the act they've committed, that is what puts them over the top to make them feel like it is no longer worth living. And that whole thing is very complicated too, of course. But that's very present. That happens a lot. And it just seems to keep happening. And I'm sure there are people trying different things. They're taking actions, and there's whatever communities and organizations that are trying to address it. But boy, that does happen a lot. And I just think having different types of conversations about these topics maybe can lead to some new ideas, and new ideas being accepted and implemented and possibly getting results that we'd all be in favor of.
And a lot of the conversations that we have nowadays are not face-to-face. They're online, and there's no transfer of emotion when you're online. If you've ever texted somebody and tried to help them understand your current state or any sort of emotion, it's quite difficult. And a lot of our conversations now are done online. So if people don't frequently speak face-to-face with people, they don't have the ability to transfer that emotion.
And of course, we're living in this rapidly changing world, which our ancestors, I suppose more recently, some of them had some really big developments technologically, electronically, in their life that shifted the way that they lived, like the random influence of these things that other people created that were then brought to the forefront affected the way they lived their lives. But boy, today, there are so many things that are changing so rapidly, and that we all have to figure out how to deal with them. And for, I think, so many of us, we try to figure out these things on our own without really having great conversations about the best ways to handle whatever it is, the constant uses of our cell phones, the information that we're getting from it, the information that we're getting from all these other sources, how it affects our lives, the video games that we play, the TV shows that we watch, our habits, the way we eat. There's so many things that are now unlike what they've ever been. And we're all just trying to do the best we can, I assume. But so many of us, me included, we don't have the tools yet to be good at everything. And being aware of that and having conversations that might get us to begin thinking in ways that might actually help ourselves or get help from others is absolutely vital.
Sure, yep. Communication is key.
Here's a question that you presented to me. How does immediate gratification differ from living in the moment? As you say, both of them are not concerned with the past or future. So you brought this up.
Sure. My question is, if we're supposed to live in the present, and it's advantageous to be as present as possible, and there's no moment other than now, how do we avoid immediate gratification? Because all you have is immediate. Do you not seek gratification?
So, yes, I think usually, but as humans, this is maybe one of the small differences, or actually probably the big difference between us and other species, is that we're not constantly going for immediate gratification. So let's take something we probably can all relate to in some way is we can train a dog who desperately wants to do whatever it wants to do. You can very much tell by the way it's acting. We can train a dog to be slightly more patient and do this because they know they're going to get some sort of future reward. So I suppose a dog can learn to delay their immediate gratification for a future reward. Well, as humans, the reason that we have roads and cars and everything else that we do, I say that now because we're in a car, of course, and I'm looking at a road, is because as a species, we've been able to delay the immediate gratification for some other reason that most of us seem to agree with is worth it. When we much would prefer to stay at home in bed and just relax, I know when that alarm goes off, especially after like the third or fourth time, and I look at the clock and realize I have this urgency where I'm compelled to go to work to make the money that allows me to do all the other things I want to do or need to do. I am delaying the immediate gratification of just turning off that alarm and staying in bed. I believe I am, even if there is free will, I believe in this instance I have no free will to stop this, and I don't agree that there is free will at this point. So this is just a learned behavior. I have no way of doing it any differently. I must turn off that alarm. I must get up. I must get dressed. I must get in my car and go to my job because that is who I am. Even though I'm not doing it because that's what I want to do in that moment, I feel compelled to do it knowing that doing this consistently will bring me an income and other benefits that the things I really want to do, I will be able to do. And I've learned that this works. This system works for me and for humans. But I know not everyone reacts to those same situations. Some people have a much more difficult time turning off that alarm. And I'm sure some people, in some cases, will just say, screw it, I'm not going into work today. I'm going to call and pretend that I'm sick or whatever else people do. I don't do that, but other people do it. So in those cases, those people maybe prefer the immediate gratification more than I do.
And it probably depends on how much you hate your job as well.
I suppose, yeah, that's the opposing force. I don't hate my job, but if I did, I think I would be more likely to consider that thought. And that's really where that thought would emerge. Like, I don't hate it. I'm going to go. I want it to be in good standing. But if I really hated it, that thought would just be constantly present in my mind. So for someone that hates their job, and at one point perhaps me being a person that had feelings that maybe resembled hating my job, I can understand how this could happen to somebody else.
Yeah, for sure. So we should find employment that we enjoy is really the moral of the story.
I think that helps get us there. Yeah. But could we as humans in 2018 always go for what is immediately gratifying? I suppose if we're so wealthy that we don't need to worry about earning an income anymore. But for anybody else, could we do that? Could we survive that way?
Well, it depends on what sort of gratification you seek, perhaps. Being gainfully employed and providing for your family is a pleasure, I believe. That's a form of gratification for me. It depends what your goals and objectives are, really.
And our goals and objectives are a culmination of everything we've ever done and who we are in the moment in time.
Yeah.
Have I sold you yet? No.
I need more data. More data.
That's fine. I totally respect that.
But I don't think it's outrageous or unfathomable. It's just hard for me because I've been such a proponent of having control over yourself and making the right decisions, constantly analyzing your actions and thoughts. It's just hard for me to grasp that none of that is within my control. I don't know.
The good news is, as of course I keep coming back to this topic, is even though I do not agree that I have free will, everything feels the same. Like, I still feel like I am in control. Like, the things that I'm doing, the fact that I'm here with you, that I eventually,
Sure.
even though I was later than I probably should have been, and not by much, but everything that led up to that moment, I feel like I was doing the same thing as I would have done 2 weeks ago, 2 years ago, even though it maybe would have been different. Actually, my actions felt the same. It felt like I was doing what I decided to do. It's just that now conceptually, I recognize that, yeah, most likely I'm not actually in control, but the feeling doesn't go away. I still feel very much in control in these moments.
Interesting. It's intriguing for sure. So I know that you typically include in your podcast a section where you realize that you were wrong and you made a complete turn or, change of thought process. And I question that personally. I question what tells you that you were wrong and that you didn't make the optimal decision based on that point in time, given the data that you were given.
I think at this point in my life and my understanding of why we do the things we do, I have done everything in that moment in time the way I had to do it. There was no other way of something happening in a given moment than what did happen because of all the factors at play. However, what I can do is look back at my life and see the areas where I've made changes or changes have happened to me, that I've done something different, that I'm approaching things differently, that appear to have been most beneficial. So it may be a different way of phrasing it. So having the concept of being wrong being so prominent in the People I Know Show podcast, it's important to me because as I look back on my life, it is the things that I realize my thinking has changed most drastically on, that stick to me about if I've improved my life, which I feel that I have, there were things that I once thought a certain way about and now think differently about. So, and if I'm going to hold to, which I will, the illusion of free will, how can I control any of this? Well, what is happening, though, is at some point I became aware that I could be wrong, that something I thought wasn't correct. So instead of arguing what I thought was correct just to defend my behavior, instead of defending my current behavior with words that I come up with to justify it, reflecting on those moments, different thoughts emerge of maybe I could have done it differently. Maybe there's a better way to do this. And I think really the point of this podcast is to have these philosophical type of discussions about things that we can reflect on, and as time goes by, suggests that, yeah, the way I do it now, it's way different than before. The way I think about it now, it's way different than before, but it's better for these reasons. And if someone's listening to someone talk about whatever it is they think they're wrong about, that manipulates our thinking in a way that I believe we become more open to. Our mind is open to more ideas. When someone says something we disagree with, instead of our natural reaction of being defensive and thinking, well, they're wrong, they're crazy, whatever, I'm right about everything, which I think is kind of a human thing that we kind of do in a lot of cases. If our thinking begins to adjust in a way that just our reaction, and this is my reaction usually, maybe not always still, when I hear something that sounds drastically different than the way I do it, instead of just immediately dismissing it like that person's wrong, that person's crazy, my reaction is maybe I've just never thought about it the way they think about it, and maybe there's a better way of thinking about it, which in turn will allow for a better way of doing it. And that is what I've come to understand. Some years ago, I never would have said that sentence. I never would have had this understanding. And I think it's the biggest growth mechanism in life is recognizing that anything that we think about, that we think we're right about, could be wrong. Everything. I profess to no longer believe that we have free will. I've professed to not believe in God. I've professed that the way I used to look at racial situations was not correct. Like, everyone is pretty much the same, and to judge someone based on their differences, the language they speak, the color of their skin, is absolutely ridiculous. I understand why I might have done that before. I understand why I grew up believing in God. I understand why on December 25th, I totally expected this person from the North Pole to come give me presents. I understand why I used to think that. I now know in my mind that all those ways of thinking are wrong at this point in time.
You were lied to.
And in some of the cases, I may have been lied to. In some of the cases, it was beliefs that other people held to be true and then shared with me. There's a lot involved in this. But just because we once learned something, quote unquote, and think something is true doesn't make it true, no matter what it is.
Sure.
And I just imagine that if I keep this way of thinking, all the new ideas that I'll be able to take in, and some of them I'm going to continue to change my thinking on whatever it is that I can't know what I'm going to change my thinking on. Yeah. I just know that I'm capable of changing my thinking, and that position is why I think I have this podcast, and why especially I've included the Being Wrong segment, because it is that willingness, that awareness, however you want to describe it, that I might be wrong about whatever it is I currently think is true, that might allow me to not only change the way I think, allow new thoughts to emerge, associate with different people differently than I am, interact with people differently based on a new willingness to be someone who I'm not currently. And I don't know if I'm in control of any of this, but I think we do resist. There are barriers that we're aware of. However, even if we're not totally in control of it, I think we're aware of how we resist information, how we resist other people. Like I know, I'm aware that if I stand with my arms crossed in front of me, I look like someone that is less friendly, less receptive to a conversation. Sure. Yep. So even though naturally sometimes I stand like that, because I'm aware of this, I will then recognize that I'm doing it, and then I'll pull my arms down and try to be more receptive. And that might lead someone to come up and say something to me when otherwise they would have looked at me and just gone to the next person.
Sure. Yeah. How do the leather chaps play into that? Does that make you more approachable?
I don't know exactly what you're talking about the leather chaps. Was this my Halloween costume from this year? I did not wear leather chaps. I don't know. Maybe
just an assumption.
Okay. Well, yeah, maybe. I've never tried them, so I suppose at some point. I can't really knock it until I try it.
I do have something that I was wrong about.
Okay. Let's do it.
Technology. So I grew up in the country, small town, probably 400 people, graduated with a class of 52 people. I knew them all very well. We all knew each other's idiosyncrasies, and we talked face to face. I grew up with very little technology. We had a landline, of course, but I didn't have cable television. We had a VCR, no video games, no computer, any of that. So it was presented to me that technology made people less communicative, that we communicate less because we're always on our devices, or that it's a distraction. But I've realized that I and the people around me are much more social because of our devices. I think the social interaction has changed, of course, but it's only changed as much as you use the tools that you're given. So we have the ability to do face-to-face conversation if you use FaceTime or Skype or some of the other programs. So if you take full advantage of that technology, I feel like we can be more social, but that's not the mindset that I had growing up, or that a lot of people tried to tell me. I had to come to that conclusion myself.
And I think to discuss you and I briefly on this topic, we used to work together. That's how we first got to know each other. And we would talk to each other at the workplace, and maybe that's all we would. But then since maybe the year or so, about a year since we don't work in the same place, we wouldn't ever see each other unless we were able to reach out to each other.
Correct.
And we don't call each other and have conversations. Maybe if this was 20 years ago and we had the landline and the what do you call it, radial? No.
The dial.
The rotary phone. Maybe we'd stand in the kitchen. Like this is how I picture it. We had our one phone way back in the day when I was growing up. It was in the kitchen, and you were attached to it. So maybe I'd call up Josh, and we'd chit-chat. Maybe if that was still the present time, because we built a friendship at work, maybe that would happen. But more likely, one of us thinks about the other because something happens. Maybe we listen to a podcast or a book or some other thing happens, and we send a text message. And then maybe we don't talk for a few weeks after that exchange. But now I have this podcast, and you are one of the people that I can depend on to tell me if I'm whatever I'm doing is in need of improvement, or if I'm doing anything well, because you are a avid podcast listener. Yeah. And we have this trust, and you're helping me by doing that. Hopefully you're also entertained by it, and now you're on the podcast. So the technology and the communication is certainly different. But I think it's brought us closer. Would we be this close if it was 30 years ago? Would we actually stand in the kitchen, or I don't know where you would stand in your household, and we'd stand there and we'd talk on the phone for an hour? Maybe. I guess it's possible.
I don't think so. No,
but
I don't believe so.
There's not a lot of time. Well, back then, maybe people had the time for that. I don't have time to stand and talk that often. Maybe I do. I guess I don't make the time. There's other ways I feel I can communicate with people and then see them in person. I'd much rather do that.
Yes. We can multitask now, too. Like, while I'm driving, I talk to my brother every single day. And he lives an hour and 20 minutes away from me. So I see him personally, 2 or 3 times a year. And we have great conversation. But I get to talk to him every day through technology. And I think it's wonderful.
Well, I think that wraps up the Driving with Josh episode. Josh Torgeson, thank you for joining me today. And in particular, I would like feedback from anyone listening to this, because this is a different style. We could do this occasionally, Josh and I, me and anybody else that I think might have a different type of conversation, but kind of philosophical maybe. Sure. I really enjoy it. So if someone enjoys listening to some of the ideas and topics we came up with, certainly some are going to stretch people's thinking a little bit. But I appreciate your perspective, because you have, of course, your unique perspective, because you are you, and you cannot be anybody else but you are right now, Josh.
That's right. I agree with that statement.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for listening to People I Know Show. A reminder, please take a moment to rate and review People I Know Show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. You can search People I Know Show on Facebook or Instagram to follow, see photos, or interact with the podcast. Plus, you can always email me, Curt Karstensen, using the email address peopleiknowshow@gmail.com. And if you like the show, encourage someone in your life to listen and or share this episode or your favorite episode on social media. One final note, as of the time I'm finalizing this episode, I'm not sure if I'll have another episode ready for Friday, December 14th, as I'll be on vacation. So for now, it's a mystery. And if you don't see a new episode then, look for another one on the following Friday. Thank you for understanding, and thanks for listening to People I Know Show.